"Ryan!" I blurted out, but the moment I heard my own voice, I realized it was too high-pitched, breaking like someone completely unable to control their emotions. Ryan flinched, stepping back as if suddenly awakened from a dream. His gaze wavered, trying to look away but still fixed on me for what felt like an eternity. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," Ryan stammered, his voice trembling, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape before he practically turned and fled. I hastily pulled the towel tighter around myself, wrapping it securely. My hands were still shaking, my legs almost frozen in place, but I forced myself to stand tall, reminding myself that I was the adult here. I had to stay calm. Yet the burning sensation on my face, neck, and chest betrayed me, making it impossible to hide my own embarrassment. I am Amelia Harper, 45 years old, a woman who has spent most of her life conquering career heights. Working tirelessly since I was young, I was often called a powerful woman for my decisiveness and ability to overcome all challenges. But the higher I climbed, the lonelier I felt. Success couldn't fill the void of loneliness, and I realized I needed a family to find the true meaning of life. That was when I met Greg Harper, a gentle and honest high school teacher. Greg was unlike any man I had ever known. He wasn't ambitious, nor did he try to prove himself. Instead, he brought a sense of safety and warmth. I loved his calm demeanor, a simple yet steadfast beauty, like a guiding light in the storm. Greg had a son named Ryan, who was 20 years old. Ryan was a typical young man of his generation, introverted, quiet, and a little unsure about his future. When I joined the Harper family, I had prepared myself to face the challenges of bonding with Ryan. Still, I couldn't help but feel disheartened when I realized the distance between us was greater than I had anticipated. Our house was in a peaceful suburb, with a small garden and a white picket fence like something out of a family movie. The living room was bright, with natural light streaming through large windows, and I always kept it neat and tidy. A wedding photo of Greg and me hung on the wall, a reminder that I had entered a new chapter of my life. Although Ryan lived with us, he kept a certain distance. He often stayed in his room, headphones on, engrossed in his computer screen. Whenever we talked, his responses were brief. Occasionally, when he sat at the dining table, I tried to strike up a conversation, but I was often met with simple replies or a hesitant smile. I didn't blame Ryan. He was stepping into adulthood and also had to face his father remarrying. I understood that he might feel as though I was taking the place of his biological mother. Because of that, I always tried to be patient, even though I couldn't help but feel a little hurt. That Sunday morning started like any other. I woke up earlier than Greg, leaving the large bed in the master bedroom to prepare for a rare leisurely day. The early sunlight filtered through the curtains, bathing the kitchen in a golden glow as I made a cup of black coffee. Greg had planned to go to school to work overtime and finish grading final exams for his students. "Will you be home late tonight?" I asked as he came down the stairs. "Probably late. I want to finish everything today so I won't be overwhelmed next week," Greg replied, his familiar deep voice soothing. I nodded, giving him a gentle smile. Greg was always like that, a man dedicated to his work. But sometimes that dedication made him distant. I understood that he wanted to set a good example for Ryan, but perhaps because of that, he had forgotten that this family needed more moments of connection. In the days following the incident, my relationship with Ryan seemed to slowly mend. He no longer avoided me as he had before, and even began to share things he rarely talked about. During our quiet conversations over warm cups of tea, Ryan opened up about the pressures of university life, endless tests, nerve-wracking presentations, and the struggles of fitting in with his peers. He spoke of feeling like an outsider in social circles, a sentiment I empathized with deeply. I listened intently, nodding, and occasionally offering gentle advice. I could sense the sincerity in his words, his effort to break the invisible wall that had grown between us. And yet, oddly enough, when his eyes met mine, there was a fleeting, indefinable emotion in the air. Those eyes, bright yet carrying something unspoken, made me pause for a moment. He's just looking for empathy, I told myself. But my reasoning felt fragile in the face of the unease stirring within me. Despite our increasing dialogue, I still sensed a lingering distance, like an invisible thread keeping us both from stepping closer. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Ryan hesitated before asking, "Mom, have you ever felt like you don't belong anywhere?" His question pierced my heart like a beam of light cutting through the dark. I looked at him, seeing not just confusion, but also a deep yearning for understanding and acceptance. I smiled, hoping to ease the weight of the moment. "Of course, Ryan. Everyone feels that way at some point. But you know what? Sometimes that feeling leads you to where you truly belong. Don't rush. Things will become clear when you're ready to face them." Ryan looked at me, his lips pressing into a thoughtful line. "I wish I could be as strong as you," he said, his voice slow and laced with emotion. I lightly touched his hand, hoping to pass along some encouragement. "You're stronger than you think, Ryan. I believe you'll find your path." But as my hand brushed against his, a strange sensation coursed through me. I quickly withdrew, trying to mask the unease that had surfaced. Ryan leaned back slightly, his gaze averting, though I caught a fleeting glimpse of something in his expression that I couldn't quite name. When I returned to my room, Ryan's words echoed in my mind. "As strong as you." Was it purely admiration? Or was there something more? I told myself everything would return to normal. We just needed more time, more distance. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing complexity of our relationship. Greg had left early that morning for a work trip, leaving the house quiet, amplifying every sound more than usual. After dinner, Ryan and I cleaned up the kitchen together. The familiar noises, the running water, the clinking of plates, filled the air with a mix of warmth and awkwardness. "Ryan, can you grab me the dish towel?" I asked, hoping to break the extended silence. "Sure, just a moment," Ryan replied, his voice warm yet tinged with hesitation, coming from near the cabinet. Carefully carrying a pot of leftover soup to pour out, I accidentally bumped the edge of the counter. It all happened too fast. I let out a startled gasp as the warm liquid splashed onto my shirt, the fabric clinging uncomfortably to my skin. The dampness spread, leaving me frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. "Oh no, Mom!" Ryan rushed over, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" I quickly shook my head, trying to reassure him. "I'm fine. Just a bit wet." Still, I couldn't deny the discomfort as the thin fabric clung to me under the soft yellow kitchen light. I turned slightly, attempting to discreetly pull the material away from my skin. But Ryan was right there, his eyes momentarily lingering before he turned away, though not quickly enough. He handed me a towel, his voice faltering slightly. "Here, Mom. Use this." "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone steady despite the odd sensation rising within me. I awkwardly dabbed at my shirt, realizing that my movements had become clumsier than usual. Ryan remained standing nearby, seemingly unsure whether to stay or leave. His expression was a mix of awkwardness and something else I couldn't quite place. Not wanting the situation to escalate, I attempted to lighten the mood with a joke. "Guess I need to be more careful next time, or I'll end up troubling you again." Ryan chuckled softly, though his smile didn't entirely reach his eyes. "As long as you're okay, that's what matters." Later that night, back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, still replaying the moment in the kitchen. Ryan's eyes, though they had only glanced at me briefly, lingered in my thoughts. Was it just natural concern for a parent, or was I overthinking things? In his room, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of Amelia, flustered and with her damp shirt clinging to her frame, replayed in his mind like a film stuck on repeat. Ryan felt a deep sense of shame, scolding himself for being unable to suppress such thoughts. Both Ryan and I were caught in a tangle of emotions, each lost in our own worlds of anxiety and confusion. In the stillness of the night, I found myself wondering, can things ever go back to the way they were? Sitting on my bed, the light from my bedside lamp cast faint patterns on the wall, mirroring the turmoil within me. The cup of tea in my hand had long since gone cold, yet I held on to it as though it were the last fragile anchor in a storm of emotions. I took a deep breath, trying to banish the image from my mind. Ryan's eyes, awkward yet carrying something I didn't want to define. Did I do something wrong? I questioned myself, the voice in my head echoing as if from a distant place. I had always prided myself on my composure and ability to handle any situation. But this time, that sense of control seemed to slip through my fingers. Why did his gaze haunt me so? And why was I so unsettled by what was, at its core, merely an accident? A wave of emotion surged through me, bringing with it an unfamiliar unease. Placing the cup on the table, I clenched my hands into fists, trying to steady myself. But the feeling clung to me like a thin veil, impossible to tear and equally hard to ignore. Was I simply overthinking, or had something truly shifted between Ryan and me? That night, neither Ryan nor I could sleep. Each of us was trapped in our own emotional worlds, where unspoken questions echoed endlessly. The darkness outside was as deep as the heaviness in my heart. I knew that sooner or later, we would have to confront the things we both wanted to avoid admitting. The next morning, when I entered the kitchen, I found Ryan already sitting at the table. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating his youthful yet weary face. Ryan's eyes briefly glanced at me as I approached, but they quickly shifted away, like a passing breeze. I carried my steaming cup of coffee to the seat across from him, trying to maintain a natural atmosphere. But that effort only made everything feel more awkward. The clinking of the spoon against the cup echoed loudly in the quiet space, breaking a silence that neither of us knew how to fill. "Did you sleep well, Ryan?" I asked, my tone light yet betraying a hint of unease. Ryan gave a small nod, his shoulders slightly hunched. "Yes, it was fine. And you?" "Also fine," I replied, feeling as though we were caught in a conversation where neither of us was truly present. Ryan's gaze avoided mine. He focused intently on the cup in front of him, his hand absent-mindedly turning it around. But I knew that in that silence, thoughts were racing in his mind, just as I was grappling with the turmoil in my heart. The image from the previous evening lingered with me. Ryan's eyes, filled with awkwardness, yet carrying something I couldn't quite define. A hint of admiration, perhaps, but this time it bore a different shade, one I couldn't ignore. I bit my lip lightly, trying to suppress the thoughts creeping into my head. "Amelia, you need to do something," I told myself, weighed down by a sense of responsibility. I was the adult, the one managing everything in this family. I had to address the issue before it became something more serious. But how could I maintain the balance? How could I keep our relationship close, yet ensure that no boundaries were crossed? It was a daunting question, and I had no idea where to find the answer. Ryan stood up, carrying his empty cup to the sink. "I'm heading out for a bit, Mom," he said quietly. I nodded, not pressing further. But as he stepped out the door, I couldn't stop myself from watching him leave. Ryan's figure, tall and grown, yet still carrying an air of shyness, left me with a strange sense of unease. I knew we were both standing on a fragile line. One wrong step, and everything could fall apart. But how could I keep things normal? How could I erase the ripples that had started to appear? Those questions repeated in my mind like waves crashing relentlessly against the shore. Almost unconsciously, I reached out to touch my coffee cup, feeling the lingering warmth. But inside, that warmth wasn't enough to chase away the cold creeping into my heart. I needed to act, and I needed to act soon, before it was too late. After breakfast that morning, sitting at my desk, I could feel the unease in my own home. The mixed emotions from the recent incident weren't just lingering in the glances and hesitant words, but they seemed to seep into the very air I breathed every day. It was an invisible, heavy pressure that kept me restless. Maybe I need a different approach, I thought to myself, my gaze shifting from the computer screen to the vibrant blue sky outside the window. I decided that, at least temporarily, I needed to create some distance so we could both stabilize our emotions. I threw myself into work, staying busy and trying to minimize moments where Ryan and I were alone in the house. I hoped that time and space would serve as the healing salve we needed. But Ryan, more perceptive than I had imagined, noticed the change. In the rare moments we crossed paths, his eyes always carried a hint of questioning, as if silently asking, "Are you avoiding me?" He didn't say it out loud, but his quiet demeanor echoed in my mind. One evening, as I busied myself in the kitchen, Ryan stepped in. He stood there for a moment, silent, as though weighing his words. Finally, he spoke softly. "Mom, have you been really busy lately? I feel like you're not around as much as before." I paused, feeling my heartbeat quicken. "Yes, there's been a lot of work," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I thought I should take the time to finish some things I've left undone." Ryan nodded, but his eyes didn't leave me. "I understand. But Mom, you don't need to avoid me. I'm really okay." His words stopped me in my tracks, as though he'd seen right through my thoughts. "I'm not avoiding you, Ryan," I said, turning to look at him, trying to keep my gaze sincere. "I just thought we could use some time to let things feel normal again." Ryan gave a faint smile, one that seemed to carry all the emotions he couldn't put into words. "I just want things to be like they used to be. I really don't want to make you uncomfortable." His words lifted part of the weight in my heart, but they also left a larger void. I wasn't sure if I had chosen the right approach, or if I was simply delaying something inevitable. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Was the distance I tried to create truly a solution, or was it only deepening the tension between us? I could sense that, deep down, both Ryan and I were seeking a resolution, but the path to it felt clouded and uncertain. Faint, unclear dreams came to me, but they weren't enough to calm my restless mind. In the stillness of the night, only sighs and unanswered questions lingered, swirling endlessly in my thoughts. Greg called to say he'd be late due to an emergency meeting about upcoming exams, leaving just Ryan and me in the quiet house. The steady ticking of the wall clock seemed to drown out every other sound, amplifying the silence to an almost eerie level. I made myself a cup of tea, planning to spend some time with an unfinished novel, but Ryan's gaze from the living room pulled my focus away. He sat on the sofa, his posture relaxed, but his face clouded with thoughts he couldn't express. The soft yellow light from the table lamp cast shadows across his face, making him look older than usual, yet the awkwardness and shyness of a young man were still evident in his eyes. I hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat in the chair opposite him. "Ryan, are you okay?" I asked gently, not wanting to disturb the stillness in the room. Ryan looked up, his eyes filled with hesitation, as though carefully considering his words. "Yes, I'm fine, Mom," he replied, but his gaze didn't meet mine. "I was just thinking about some things." I placed my cup of tea on the table, leaning back in my chair, my eyes fixed on Ryan. "Is something bothering you?" I asked. "You can share with me if you want to." Ryan gave a faint smile, but it didn't hide his discomfort. "It's nothing big, Mom. Just, sometimes I feel a little lost. I don't know what I want or need." I nodded, sensing the sincerity in his voice. "That's something everyone experiences, Ryan. In times like that, you need to give yourself time to understand who you are. And remember, no one expects you to have all the answers right away." Ryan's expression softened as he looked at me. "Do you really think so? I see you always know what you want, always so strong and confident." I'm not like you." His words caught me off guard. "Ryan, I've been lost before too, not knowing what to do, I admitted. But I learned to accept that not everything is clear all the time. And you know what? That feeling of being lost is part of growing up. Ryan nodded slightly, but his eyes drifted off, as if lost in a different train of thought. I realized this wasn't just about the pressures of youth. The atmosphere in the room seemed heavier, filled with an unspoken tension. Ryan, I said, breaking the silence. I feel like there's something you've been wanting to say but haven't been able to. If there is, you can tell me. I'll listen. Ryan looked at me directly for the first time, but his eyes revealed an inner struggle. Mom, actually, he began, his hands clenched tightly on his knees. I felt my heartbeat quicken, as though the air in the room had grown denser. Ryan, there's no rush. Speak when you're ready, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ryan took a deep breath, relaxing his shoulders, but he didn't say anything more. The tension in his eyes made me feel as though the world had paused in that moment. I left the living room after our conversation, carrying a mix of emotions. I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing by encouraging him to open up, or if I had inadvertently made things more difficult. But deep down, I knew that my relationship with Ryan had reached a new turning point, a path filled with emotions that had yet to be defined. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the gentle wind brushing against the window, my mind spinning with questions. Have I gone too far? Or is this just a necessary step to erase the awkwardness between us? I wondered, feeling like I was walking a tightrope between responsibility and vague emotions. In the next room, Ryan couldn't sleep either. He lay there, his eyes wide open in the darkness, his heart filled with emotions he couldn't explain. He told himself that with time, everything would be fine. But was time truly the answer? Or would it merely prolong the simmering tension between two people trying to regain a lost balance? I thought about returning to the book in my hand, hoping to lose myself in its pages, as I often did when trying to escape complex thoughts. But Ryan's sudden voice pulled me back to reality. Mom, I want to thank you. I looked up, surprised at the sincerity in his voice. Putting the book down on the table, I turned to Ryan. Thank me for what, Ryan? He hesitated for a few seconds, as if carefully considering how to express what he wanted to say. His eyes lowered to his hands, clenched tightly on his knees. For always treating me so well, he began, his voice low and deliberate, each word weighed with care. I know being a stepmother isn't easy, especially to someone as reserved as me. I smiled, feeling a gentle warmth spreading through me. I'm just doing what I think is right, Ryan. You're Greg's son, and that makes you part of this family too. I want what's best for all of us. Ryan lifted his head, his eyes suddenly more introspective. I just wish I could be as strong as you. You always know what you want, what to do, but me, I feel like I'm always stuck, unable to find my way out. His words struck a chord deep within me, a place I hadn't thought about when dealing with him. I never knew Ryan looked up to me with such admiration. A wave of mixed emotions washed over me, pride, tenderness, and a hint of worry. Setting down my teacup, I slowly moved closer and sat beside him. The closer proximity made me more aware of his unease, like a taut string on a violin. Ryan, I'm not as strong as you think, I began, my voice gentle yet firm enough to break the suffocating atmosphere. Everyone feels lost at times, I do too. What's important is that you believe in yourself and take small steps to figure out what you truly want. Ryan remained silent, but his eyes stayed on me. In those eyes, I saw gratitude, sincerity, and at the same time, a glimmer of something unusual, difficult to define, leaving me unsettled. I stood up, trying to dispel the unease in my heart. All right, it's late. You should get some sleep. We have a lot to do tomorrow. Ryan nodded, standing up as well, but before leaving, he hesitated briefly. His eyes met mine, hesitant, as if searching for the right words to say something important. Mom, I really admire you. You're the most amazing woman I've ever met." His words made me pause. I smiled, doing my best to mask the unease brewing inside me. "Thank you, Ryan. But I think you have some incredible potential too. I hope you'll discover that for yourself." Ryan nodded, a faint smile on his lips before he turned and walked back to his room. I stayed in the living room, the soft yellow light spreading across the floor like a thin veil. A sudden sense of loneliness enveloped me, even though just moments ago, Ryan had been sitting next to me. His words, his gaze, felt like a small needle gently pricking the place I was trying to protect, the boundary between care and those ambiguous emotions that shouldn't exist. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind swirled with unanswered questions. Did I handle that correctly? Have I inadvertently made Ryan feel even more pressured? After the conversation with Ryan, I couldn't stop mulling things over. The relationship between us couldn't remain in this ambiguous state. Even though I believed that neither of us had intentionally crossed any lines, those unclear emotions, if left unchecked, could become a burden neither of us wanted. I needed to address this, not just to help Ryan navigate his confusion, but also to protect the balance within our family. One morning, I decided to discuss things with Greg. In the gentle morning light, our small kitchen felt unusually cozy. Greg sat at the table, holding a cup of coffee, his face showing the relaxed expression of someone who had just had a good night's sleep. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "Greg," I began, my voice gentle but serious enough to capture his attention. "I think we need to spend more time with Ryan. He's growing up, and perhaps he needs your guidance more than ever." Greg furrowed his brow, placing his coffee cup on the table. His normally composed eyes now carried a hint of concern. "Do you think Ryan's going through something? He hasn't said anything to me." I exhaled softly, choosing my words carefully. "Ryan has always been reserved, but I can sense he's seeking guidance. He needs to feel heard and understood. You're his father, the person he needs most right now." Greg looked at me, his face now filled with seriousness. "I'll try my best. Maybe I've been too busy and haven't paid enough attention to him, but I don't want Ryan to feel lost." His words brought me a sense of relief. Though Greg wasn't the most intuitive person, his sincerity and effort always reassured me. As Greg stood up and stepped outside to breathe in the morning air, I remained seated in the quiet kitchen, my gaze lingering on the faint steam rising from his coffee. What I had said to Greg wasn't just advice for him, but also a reminder to myself. I needed to define my role clearly within this family. As a stepmother, my responsibility wasn't just to care for Ryan, but to help him find the right path. I wanted him to feel warmth and safety, while maintaining enough distance to avoid misunderstandings that could strain relationships. Deep down, I knew Ryan was grappling with pressures far greater than he let on. He wasn't just battling personal expectations, but also navigating complex emotions he didn't dare confront. As an adult, I understood this was a time when he needed guidance more than ever. When Greg returned with a glass of lemonade in hand, he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his eyes full of determination. "Thank you for reminding me. I'll do my best to be someone Ryan can lean on." I smiled, silently hoping this would be the beginning of a return to normalcy. But deep in my mind, a part of me still worried. Even small ripples take time to fade away. As Greg and Ryan started spending more time together, I hoped that Ryan's gaze would no longer carry those shades of confusion that unsettled me. I hoped that, with Greg's stronger presence, Ryan's unsettled emotions would gradually fade, allowing our relationship to return to its rightful course. Since that conversation, I began noticing changes within our family. Greg, seemingly aware of his responsibilities, took the initiative to plan a family outing. For the first time in years, the three of us decided to go camping in a small forest nearby. That morning, soft sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a space that was both serene and tranquil. Ryan seemed hesitant when he first heard about the plan, but under Greg's enthusiasm, He eventually agreed. When we arrived, Greg began setting up the tent with his usual clumsiness, amusing both Ryan and me with his humorous commentary about his exploration skills. Although Ryan didn't say much, I noticed he seemed more at ease. In the afternoon, as Greg struggled to start a fire, I spotted Ryan sitting by the stream, his gaze fixed on the gently flowing water. The sunlight illuminated his face, reflecting emotions I couldn't quite decipher. I approached carefully, not wanting to disturb the peaceful moment. Sitting down beside him, I asked softly, "Ryan, how are you feeling?" Ryan turned to me, his eyes softer, free of the awkwardness or hesitation that had been there before. "I feel much better, Mom. It's been so long since Dad and I did something like this together." His words brought me a sense of relief, like setting down an invisible burden. I smiled, feeling the light breeze brush through my hair. "I'm so glad to see you opening up. Your dad loves you very much, Ryan. He always wants the best for you, even if he's not great at showing it." Ryan nodded slightly, a faint but genuine smile appearing on his lips. I realized this was the first time in weeks that he had allowed himself to relax. Returning from the trip, I noticed significant changes in Ryan's behavior. He no longer avoided me, and his eyes no longer held those ambiguous emotions. Instead, he began focusing on his studies and exploring new opportunities. One morning, he approached me and said, "Mom, I think I'm going to apply for a part-time job. I want to challenge myself and become more independent." I nodded, pride swelling in my heart. "I think that's a great idea, Ryan. I've always believed you can achieve anything if you set your mind to it." In the days that followed, our family dinners became livelier. Greg often shared stories about his days at school, while Ryan talked about the lessons he was learning at his part-time job. The cozy atmosphere around the dinner table made me realize that every ripple in relationships could be smoothed out with time, sincerity, and understanding. One evening, as the three of us sat together around the table, Ryan suddenly spoke up. "Dad, Mom, I want to thank both of you for always being there for me. I think I've found my path." Greg, his pride unmistakable in his eyes, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I've always believed in you, Ryan. You are my pride and joy." I smiled too, feeling a warmth spreading through every corner of my heart. At last, the ambiguous emotions, misunderstandings, and distance had been resolved. Our family's journey was not just a story of connection, but also a lesson in confronting and overcoming the challenges within relationships. When I returned to the bedroom to get ready for a shower, Ryan stepped out of his room. He was wearing a light gray hoodie and jeans, his hair messy as if he had just woken up. He nodded slightly to greet me, but didn't stop to chat. "Good morning, Ryan," I said in the friendliest tone I could manage. "Good morning, Mom," he replied briefly before hurrying down the stairs. I watched his figure retreating, wondering if Ryan ever felt comfortable living with me. He wasn't rude, nor did he intentionally ignore me, but the distance in his eyes always left me feeling uneasy. After finishing my cup of coffee, I returned to the bedroom. The spacious room with its luxurious furnishings was something I had chosen myself. Every piece reflected my style, elegant but understated. I opened the wardrobe, took out a soft towel, and headed into the bathroom. Warm water cascaded down, washing away the fatigue accumulated over the past week. I always treated shower time as a moment to relax and recharge. I stepped out of the bathroom, the warm steam clinging to me, creating a thin mist that enveloped the hallway. The sensation of smooth, cool skin wrapped in the soft towel brought comfort after a long day. But just a few steps in, suddenly, the towel slipped off my body, as if deliberately betraying the care I had taken with every movement prior. Frozen in place, I looked down in shock at the towel lying at my feet. Before I could bend down to pick it up, I became aware of another pair of eyes that appeared at the end of the hallway. Ryan was standing there. He had just stepped out of his room, holding a book in his hands, with the hallway light casting its glow on his youthful but now frozen face. His wide, unblinking eyes made it seem as though everything else had disappeared, leaving only the image before him. It felt like time had stopped. I stood there, my heart pounding wildly in my chest, a surge of heat rising from my neck and spreading to my cheeks. Never in my life had I felt such embarrassment, so overwhelming that I didn't know where to hide my face. My hands trembled, almost powerless, but I forced myself to bend down and pick up the towel. I, Ryan stammered. His voice choked as if strangled. His lips quivered, his face flushed, and his hands clutched the book tightly, as though it was the only thing anchoring him from plunging into an abyss. "Ryan!" I blurted out. But as soon as I heard my voice, I realized it was too high-pitched and broken, like someone completely unable to control their emotions. Ryan flinched, stepping back as if snapped out of a dream. His gaze wavered, trying to look away but still lingering on me for what felt like an endless moment. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," Ryan stammered, his voice trembling, his eyes darting around in a desperate search for an escape, before he nearly turned and fled. I quickly pulled the towel back up, wrapping it tightly around myself. My hands were still shaking, my legs almost frozen, but I forced myself to stand tall, reminding myself that I was the adult here. I needed to stay calm. But the burning sensation on my face, neck, and chest betrayed me, making it impossible to hide my embarrassment. "It's okay, Ryan. It was just an accident," I called after him, trying to ease the awkwardness in the air. But my voice, despite being gentle, broke apart as though shattered into pieces. Ryan didn't respond, only hurrying to the corner of the hallway, his back radiating an overwhelming sense of guilt and shame. I stood there, watching him for what felt like an eternity. The hallway was now so silent that I could hear my own rapid breathing. A wave of shame surged within me, threatening to suffocate my reason. I bit my lip, trying to calm myself, but the thought of his gaze seeing me in that situation kept spinning in my mind, making my cheeks burn as if they were on fire. I quickly stepped into the room, slamming the door shut, leaning against the cold wooden surface as if it could dispel the chaos within me. "How could this happen?" I muttered, feeling waves of shame and confusion washing over me. I raised my hands to cover my face, eyes tightly shut, but the image of Ryan's wide, astonished eyes resurfaced, vivid and undeniable, leaving me utterly unsettled. My heart still raced as though trapped in a situation with no escape. In my mind, questions echoed. What is Ryan thinking? Does he feel as awkward as I do? But regardless of the answer, I knew this incident would haunt me for a long time. I closed the door behind me, leaning against its icy surface, taking a deep breath to calm myself. Yet no matter how hard I tried, the pounding in my chest wouldn't stop, drumming incessantly like thunder in an empty hall. It was just an accident, I repeated in my mind, like a mantra, trying to reassure myself. But the reality of what had just occurred couldn't be erased so easily. It felt like a blot of ink spreading across a white page. The more I tried to hide it, the more conspicuous it became. I stepped toward the mirror on the wall, the dim yellow light from the bedside lamp illuminating my face, accentuating every detail. The face staring back at me, once familiar and composed, now bore a flush of red. My cheeks burned as if set ablaze, and my eyes reflected a turmoil I couldn't conceal. I raised a hand to adjust my hair, but my trembling fingers inadvertently caused a few strands to fall across my forehead. In that moment, I felt so small, like a ship swept into a sudden storm, unable to steer. The image of Ryan standing frozen in the hallway replayed in my mind, vivid as a slow-motion film. His wide eyes, filled with confusion and surprise, felt like a mirror reflecting my own embarrassment. His face, flushed crimson, radiated an awkwardness he couldn't hide. How did I let this happen? I asked myself, the voice in my head sounding like a whisper from a distant place. The event, lasting only seconds, left an indelible mark, like a small cut, slicing into the most sensitive part of my being. On the other side of the hallway, Ryan shut his door, leaning against it the way I had just done. His hand still trembled slightly as he clutched his phone tightly, as if it were the only tether keeping him grounded amidst the chaos. The scene replayed in his mind without pause, so vivid that every time he closed his eyes, he saw the light from the hallway reflecting off Amelia's soft skin, and the white towel falling like a snowflake melting in the winter air. Ryan walked to his bed and sat down slowly, his head bowed. His heart pounded as if trying to escape his chest. The phone in his hand, usually a source of distraction and comfort, now felt utterly useless. His fingers swiped across the screen, but his mind remained captive to that moment. Why was I so foolish? Ryan scolded himself. Yet he couldn't deny that Amelia's gaze, the way she tried to maintain her composure and mask her embarrassment, left him feeling not just ashamed, but confused, mixed with an emotion he couldn't name. Outside the window, darkness began to creep in. But for both of them, the brightness of what had happened still burned vividly, leaving an awkward, indescribable sensation, like an invisible thorn lodged too deep to pull out or ignore. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house felt like a fogged glass, separating me and Ryan, making everything blurry and uncertain. Greg, with his usual oblivious and calm demeanor, noticed nothing unusual. He continued going to work on time and returning home with his familiar composed presence, sharing anecdotes about his students at dinner. But between Ryan and me, the usual ease had been frozen, replaced by avoiding glances and silent, awkward moments. In the evening, during dinner, the sound of cutlery clinking against plates echoed steadily but awkwardly, like noises trying to fill an unerasable void. Ryan kept his head down, intently focused on his plate, as if the grilled meat on it was the most fascinating subject in the world. I tried to remain calm, but every time I wanted to speak, the awkwardness held me back. Ryan, you've been quieter than usual lately. Is something wrong? I asked, keeping my tone as gentle and caring as possible. Ryan froze, his hand gripping the knife trembling slightly. No. Nothing's wrong, Mom, he replied, but his eyes never left his plate. I looked at Ryan for a long moment, trying to find a trace of truth in his evasive gaze, but he didn't dare to lift his head. That expression, the way he looked uneasy, only made me more certain that the incident still haunted him. And truthfully, it was affecting me too. I set my fork down, my heart heavy. Everything was still so vivid in my mind, like a living picture that couldn't fade. Ryan's eyes that day, the astonishment mixed with fear, and my overwhelming embarrassment, all remained deeply etched in my memory. I kept telling myself it was just an accident, but why couldn't I feel at ease? Had this prolonged silence turned it into something bigger? Across the table, Ryan quietly cut his meat into smaller pieces, his movements slow, as if trying to prolong dinner and avoid leaving the table too soon. But I could sense the tension around him, like an invisible string tightening more and more. Are you sure nothing's wrong, Ryan? I asked again, my voice still gentle but tinged with worry. This time, Ryan lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. Those eyes, filled with awkwardness, unease, and a hint of guilt, left me speechless. No, really, there's nothing, Mom, he replied, his voice trying to sound steady but betraying a tremble. I nodded slightly, deciding not to press further, but inside, the unease refused to subside. When dinner ended, Ryan got up faster than usual, hurriedly gathering the plates and cutlery and placing them in the sink with clumsy motions. I'll do the dishes, he said, trying to act natural but only making things more awkward. No need, Ryan. Go to your room. I'll take care of it, I said, trying not to sound too stern. Ryan nodded and quickly left the kitchen, as if running away. I stood there, watching his retreating figure, feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to address the situation decisively, to clear the stifling air. But another part feared that revisiting the topic would only hurt him further. I raised my hand to rub my forehead, as if trying to dispel the chaotic thoughts in my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, the sense of awkwardness lingered. It clung to me like a persistent shadow, making it impossible to feel at ease as before. Since that incident, I began to notice a stark change in the rhythm of life in the house. Everything, from the smallest details, like the sound of footsteps in the hallway in the morning or the rare laughter at the dinner table, now seemed to carry a completely different tone. Stifled and cautious, I kept trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, but inside, an unspoken storm was brewing. Every time I stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast, the space felt constricted, and even the soft morning sunlight through the window failed to calm my troubled mind. Ryan, who used to at least talk to me about small things, now seemed deeply entrenched in his own world. He was like a penguin sliding across icy terrain, trying to find a safe haven away from my gaze. His room, a space where the door used to be slightly ajar, was now closed, as if creating a boundary I couldn't cross. In the mornings, when I invited him to sit for breakfast, Ryan only nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on the table. "Thank you," he said, his voice so faint it sounded as though the words were choked by something heavy in his chest. As for me, every time I walked down the hallway, it felt like crossing a suspension bridge, with each taut cable trembling under immense pressure. This small house, once a place I thought I could find joy after a long day, had now turned into a canvas painted with somber gray hues. I knew I needed to do something to resolve this awkwardness, but every time I thought about it, I found myself trapped in my own tangled thoughts. Where should I start? How could I break through this invisible wall without making things worse? These questions repeated endlessly in my mind, like a song stuck on an infinite loop. Ryan, on the other hand, could not hide the turmoil in his heart. He didn't speak, but his silence was louder than any words. He moved like a shadow through every corner of the house, half wanting to hide, half longing to be noticed. But his eyes, the ones he avoided whenever they met mine, said that the incident still lingered in his mind, like a stubborn scratch on a polished surface. And I, despite being someone who had faced countless challenges in the outside world, now didn't know what to do to mend the distance between Ryan and me. I began to feel an undefined unease creeping into my heart, like a quiet wave ready to wash away everything I once took pride in. As a strong and independent woman, I always believed I could control everything, from work to relationships to the unexpected twists in life. But now, in my own home, I felt like a lost soul, unsure of how to move forward. The silence between Ryan and me was like a fragile yet impenetrable glass, constantly making me question myself. Did I unintentionally push him away? Did that incident make things worse? These questions echoed in my mind, accompanied by a heavy feeling in my chest. Even so, I didn't dare to bring up the past. The words seemed stuck in my throat, and every time I tried, the fear of making things worse held me back. That night, after Greg had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the living room, the soft yellow light of the lamp barely illuminating the corner. Outside, the night was cloaked in darkness, and the pale moonlight streaming through the window seemed like a silent companion, witnessing my inner turmoil. I stared into the empty space, searching for answers, but all I received was unending silence. A sense of loneliness engulfed me, as if I were standing at a crossroads where every path was shrouded in mist. I realized that if I didn't resolve this soon, the distance between Ryan and me would only grow, potentially shattering the delicate balance within this home. But where should I begin? And how could I fix things when I was already so shaken myself? I sat silently on the sofa, the faint light from the table lamp seemingly stretching the weight of my thoughts. The room's silence was only broken by the ticking of the wall clock, as if counting down to the moment I would have to face my decision. The incident that day replayed endlessly in my mind, and every time I thought about it, A wave of emotions washed over me. Embarrassment, guilt, and above all, a heavy sense of responsibility. I was the one holding this house together, ensuring this family didn't fall into the kind of gaps that everyone knows are hard to bridge. But this time, I felt like I had lost my grip. I, a woman who prided herself on solving any problem with composure and decisiveness, now felt trapped in silence and awkwardness. This can't go on, I told myself, feeling a spark of determination take root. If I don't do something, this distance will become a wall separating me and Ryan. It will not only leave him feeling isolated, but also make me doubt myself. My gaze stopped on my reflection in the glass door, my face looking resolute but unable to hide a trace of exhaustion. I knew this needed closure, not through avoidance, but through confrontation. Tomorrow, I would talk to Ryan. I would find out how he was feeling, and more importantly, I would let him know that this was just an accident, nothing worth losing the bond in our family. I took a deep breath, as if reigniting a flame of determination. It won't be easy, but I've overcome bigger challenges. This is just a conversation and I can do it, I reassured myself, my gaze growing more determined as I looked out into the night. The pale moonlight outside seemed to empathize with me, illuminating the dark sky and reminding me that all darkness can be dispelled. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace, not from avoidance, but from the courage to face it head-on. In the days following the incident, the atmosphere in the house seemed to sink. Every morning when I walked into the kitchen, Ryan was no longer there with his coffee and familiar laptop. The chair where he usually sat was now empty, creating a void that was hard to describe. Breakfast, which was once filled with laughter and small talk, was now only accompanied by the clinking of cutlery against plates. Greg, as usual, remained calm with his morning newspaper, but even he seemed to sense something unusual. Ryan had withdrawn into his own world. His bedroom door, which used to be slightly ajar, was now closed, as if rejecting any interaction. I occasionally heard his footsteps echo lightly and quickly in the hallway, as though he was trying to avoid me. Whenever we happened to meet, Ryan's gaze always darted away. He avoided me like someone avoiding something they didn't know how to confront. His eyes no longer held the natural ease of the past, replaced instead by awkwardness, mixed with a hint of anxiety. As for me, every time I walked past Ryan's room, I felt a lump forming in my chest. I wanted to knock on the door, to ask if he was okay, but I didn't have the courage. Perhaps I was trying to avoid things myself. The barrier between us wasn't tangible, but it was there, as strong as an invisible wall. A distance I never thought would exist, and now, I didn't know how to break it. "Ryan doesn't seem to be doing well lately, have you noticed?" Greg asked, breaking the silence as we cleared the dinner table. His voice carried a note of concern, though his gaze was as gentle as ever. He was always attentive and sensitive, but also vulnerable to unusual changes within the family. I nodded slightly, setting the stack of plates into the sink, avoiding Greg's eyes. A pang of indescribable emotion hit me, a mix of unease, worry, and confusion I couldn't articulate. "Maybe it's the pressure from college," Greg continued, as if trying to soothe his own thoughts. "The boy will be fine, I think." I wanted to believe that, but deep down I knew Ryan's silence wasn't just about schoolwork or the stress of youth. "Yeah, probably," I replied briefly, my voice so soft it was as if I feared my words might touch an invisible thread of tension in the air. Greg looked at me for a moment, perhaps expecting me to share more, but in the end, he simply smiled. A faint, forced smile, as if trying to end the topic without delving deeper. When Greg left the kitchen, the room fell silent again, with only the sound of water running from the tap. I stood still, gripping the edge of the counter, my eyes fixed on the tiled floor as if searching for answers in its cold patterns. I knew well the reason behind Ryan's change. The sidelong glances, the hurried steps away every time I appeared. All of it was a silent reminder that our relationship was being strained. I also knew that if I didn't act soon, this awkwardness would slowly solidify into a wall that would separate Ryan and me forever. But how to start? How to break through this fragile barrier without causing harm? Outside the window, the night sky stretched endlessly, with pale moonlight as a quiet companion. I felt trapped in a whirlwind of emotions, torn between maintaining distance to protect the family's balance and stepping closer to ease the worry in Ryan's eyes. The serenity outside belied the storm quietly rising within me. I stood before Ryan's door, my heart full of indescribable emotions. My hand lightly touched the cold wooden surface, as if seeking courage in that silent moment. Inside, the air seemed still, with only the ticking of the clock in the living room breaking the silence. "Ryan, may I come in?" My voice was soft, yet it carried hidden tension. A pause stretched out. I heard the sound of a chair shifting, then his voice quietly replied, "Yes, Mom, come in." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ryan was sitting on the bed, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes cast downward, intently focused on his hands clasped together as if they were the only place he could hide. The soft glow from the desk lamp cast long shadows on the walls, amplifying the stillness in the room. His desk was neat, with books arranged meticulously, reflecting Ryan's orderly nature. But today, that neatness made me feel even more distant. I sat on a chair across from his bed, keeping a safe distance to avoid making him feel pressured, yet close enough to engage in a conversation. "Ryan," I began, trying to keep my voice calm, though my heart pounded as if it would burst from my chest. "About the other day, I know you feel awkward, but I want you to understand that it was just an accident. I don't want it to affect our relationship." Ryan slightly lifted his head, but his eyes only met mine briefly before shifting back to an unfocused spot on the floor. His face was flushed, his lips pressed together as if holding back something. "Yes, I understand," he replied, his voice small, almost faint. "I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable." I took a deep breath, searching for the right words to dispel the awkwardness between us. "I'm not upset, Ryan," I said, trying to smile, though my gaze remained serious. "But I'm worried that if you keep this distance, we won't stay as close as before. I want us to be a real family." Ryan furrowed his brow slightly, as though struggling with himself. He said nothing, but his clasped hands tightened. I could clearly see the unease in his eyes, a mix of embarrassment, anxiety, and a hint of awkwardness I couldn't quite reach. "I didn't mean to make things different," he said, his voice sounding like he was defending himself. "I just don't know how to go back to the way things were." His words left me silent. I looked at Ryan, realizing for the first time that he too was grappling with his own insecurities. "We can start over, Ryan," I said, looking directly at him. "I'm here to help you, and I believe that if we try, everything will be okay." Ryan lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine for the first time during the conversation. Though brief, in that moment, I saw a glimmer of light in his gaze, as if he was grasping the sincerity I was trying to convey. "Yes, I'll try, Mom," he replied, his voice low but full of earnestness. The conversation ended, but within me, a flicker of hope was ignited. I knew things wouldn't change overnight, but this was the first step toward breaking down the barrier between us. Ryan sat there silently for a few seconds, as if considering everything I had just said. The room seemed to pause, with only the faint ticking of the clock on his desk breaking the stillness. Then he nodded slightly, a small gesture, but one full of meaning. "Yes, I'll try harder, Mom," he said, his voice low, as though affirming something to himself. "I don't want things to get worse." Ryan's words were like a gentle breeze sweeping through my heart, bringing with it the relief I had been waiting for. I stood up, stepped closer, and lightly placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension that still lingered, though it was no longer as closed off as before. "I know you're a good young man, Ryan," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Relax. Don't let this incident haunt you anymore." Ryan lifted his head to look at me, his eyes showing a mix of gratitude and lingering embarrassment. The light from the desk lamp illuminated his face, highlighting his youthful features burdened with hidden worries. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice tinged with a slight tremble. As I left his room, I felt my steps grow lighter, as though part of the weight in my heart had been lifted. The hallway was quiet, bathed in the warm glow of yellow light stretching across the wooden floor, giving a sense of both peace and melancholy. I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, placed my hands on my knees, and took a deep breath. It felt like I had just overcome a difficult challenge, but also made an important step toward healing. In that moment, I realized that easing the awkwardness between us not only helped Ryan feel more at ease, but also allowed me to regain balance in this family dynamic. Still, a small worry lingered in my mind. I knew that to truly return to normalcy, it would take more than just one conversation. Both Ryan and I needed more time, more genuine moments to rebuild trust and connection. I looked out the window, where the pale moonlight blanketed the quiet garden outside. The initial sense of relief replaced the unease, but I understood that this was merely the beginning of a longer journey. "Everything will be fine," I told myself, gradually letting my mind relax. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt like I was drifting in an endless sea, unsure of where the shore was. The gentle glow of the bedside lamp filled the room, but it wasn't enough to soothe the thoughts swirling in my mind. The conversation with Ryan replayed vividly, every word, every glance. I wondered whether I had done enough to help him feel at ease, or if I had only added to the existing awkwardness. "Everything will be fine," I repeated to myself, but the phrase felt like a fragile reassurance, easily broken. I closed my eyes, trying to banish the image of Ryan's averted gaze, but it kept replaying in my head. He was a young man with clumsy, vulnerable emotions. The incident, though just an accident, had left small ripples in both our hearts. I worried that these ripples, if not smoothed over, could gradually deepen into cracks that would be hard to mend. In the room next door, I knew Ryan wasn't sleeping either. The dim light spilling through the gap in his door was a sign of his restlessness. I imagined him lying there, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling with a heavy heart. For Ryan, facing me must have been incredibly difficult. I wasn't just his stepmother. I was also a symbol of strength and independence, qualities I knew might sometimes make him feel small and pressured. I wondered whether I had inadvertently created this distance, or if the recent incident had only deepened the divide between us. The moonlight streaming through the window painted faint outlines on the curtain, casting soft shadows on the wall. I stared at them, feeling as though they mirrored the faint, fragile hopes that seemed to be slipping away. Yet deep down, I held on to a small glimmer of belief that this relationship could be repaired. I believed that honesty and sincerity would be the bridge to bring us back together, or perhaps even strengthen our bond. Tomorrow will be different, I thought, though the words in my mind felt more like a prayer than a declaration. Would tomorrow truly bring new light, or would the shadows continue to linger over this family? Only time would tell. After that candid conversation, I noticed Ryan had changed. He no longer avoided me like before, and the awkward distance gradually gave way to proactive gestures, sometimes even surprising ones. He began participating in family activities, small tasks that, though insignificant, made me feel his effort to mend things. In the evenings, instead of retreating to his room, Ryan appeared more often in the living room. Sometimes he sat with Greg and me to watch a movie or quietly read a book. He was no longer as silent as before, occasionally contributing a few stories that made the atmosphere cozier. One morning, as I was trying to lift the large vase on the table to replace the water, Ryan suddenly appeared behind me. "Let me do that for you, Mom," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Before I could respond, Ryan quickly took the vase from my hands, his movements tidy yet careful. I was momentarily surprised, looking at him with an expression of gratitude. "Thank you, Ryan," I smiled. "I didn't expect you to notice such small details." Ryan smiled, looking a little shy. "I think you've already done too much. Sometimes I just want to help you a little." I watched as he carried the vase to the kitchen, his tall frame and natural demeanor giving me a sense of quiet comfort. This gesture wasn't just a small act, it was an unspoken commitment that he wanted things to return to normal. When he came back with the vase freshly filled, I took it and placed it back on the table. "You did a great job. Maybe I should assign you more tasks," I joked lightly. Ryan laughed, his eyes reflecting a warmth I hadn't seen in a long time. "As long as you don't ask me to cook, we'll be fine. I don't want anyone to get food poisoning." I burst into laughter at his comment, a relaxed, genuine laugh that seemed to dispel the lingering tension from before. Looking at him, I couldn't help but feel relieved. The distance between us seemed to be narrowing, and the sincerity from both sides had begun to rebuild this relationship. I thought to myself, perhaps we had overcome the hardest part. But deep down, I reminded myself to remain cautious, ensuring no other incident could disrupt the peace Ryan and I were striving to restore. As time passed, the atmosphere between Ryan and me became lighter. The invisible distance that once existed seemed to fade, replaced by an ease and naturalness that we both could feel. Ryan began initiating conversations, his random questions often leading to surprisingly engaging discussions. One afternoon, as the soft sunlight streamed through the window, Ryan sat on the sofa, his eyes seemingly lost in thought. I was folding laundry nearby when I heard him ask, his voice low and slightly hesitant, "Mom, did you ever think, when you were younger, that you'd get married so late in life?" I paused, looking at him with a mix of surprise and amusement. The question made me chuckle softly, not out of mockery, but because of the genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Not really," I replied, placing a folded towel on the table. "But I think life always has twists and turns we can't anticipate. Sometimes the things we don't expect turn out to be the most interesting parts." Ryan leaned back against the sofa, his eyes blinking slowly as if pondering something. "I get it. Sometimes I feel lost. I'm not sure what I want to do or even what I'm capable of doing," he admitted. I stayed silent for a few moments, looking at him as though seeing a younger version of myself, filled with doubts, uncertainty, and nameless fears. Though Ryan often seemed calm, it was clear that beneath his quiet demeanor lay a soul grappling to find direction. "You're still young, Ryan," I said, sitting down next to him. "Everything is still ahead of you. Sometimes, not knowing what you want is part of the journey. What's important is that you don't give up." I placed my hand gently on his shoulder, a light touch, but one full of meaning. Ryan tilted his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine with gratitude and a hint of solace. "Thank you, Mom," he said softly, almost as if confessing that he needed this encouragement more than anything else. We sat there, saying nothing more. The ticking of the wall clock filled the quiet space, but it no longer felt awkward or pressured. I realized that the sincerity in every word and glance was beginning to rebuild the trust and bond between us. In my heart, I felt a newfound sense of ease. The worries I once had were gradually fading, replaced by hope that the relationship between Ryan and me would continue to improve. Not just as a stepmother and stepson, but as two individuals who could share their deepest thoughts with each other. As time passed, I began noticing subtle but unusual changes in the way Ryan looked at me. His eyes, which had always reflected the simple respect and affection of a son for his stepmother, now occasionally carried a different kind of light. It was hard to define, but it was undeniably no longer as pure as before. It felt like a stray ray of sunlight filtering through a window, both warm and uncomfortably intrusive. One afternoon, while I was cooking in the kitchen, Ryan stood beside me, holding a small knife and slowly chopping vegetables. The kitchen was flooded with light, golden beams streaming through the glass windows, casting the shadows of leaves onto the tiled floor. The space was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic sound of the knife on the cutting board and the faint aroma of spices wafting through the air. Ryan said nothing, but his eyes lingered on me, more intently than necessary. I turned to him, catching his gaze, and smiled, trying to maintain a natural demeanor. "Do you need me to show you how to chop faster?" I asked, gesturing toward the still messy pile of vegetables. "You're amazing at everything," Ryan said unexpectedly, his voice deep and sincere. "I don't understand how you can do all of this and stay so calm." His comment caught me off guard for a moment. It was a simple compliment, but the way Ryan said it, combined with the unwavering look in his eyes, made my heart falter slightly. I laughed, trying to brush away the strange feeling creeping into my chest. "I've done it so many times that it's just second nature. You'll get good too, with practice." Ryan smiled, but instead of returning to his chopping, his gaze remained fixed on my face, as though searching for something in its every contour. It wasn't an evaluative or curious look. It was more akin to excessive admiration, which made me feel somewhat uneasy. I turned away, busying myself with the pot of boiling water on the stove, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Ryan's words weren't wrong, nor was his gaze inappropriate. Yet the feeling it stirred in me was distinctly different. It was like a small bell ringing softly, reminding me that something was amiss, or at least not entirely normal. As Ryan continued chopping, I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was focused on his task, but his shoulders seemed slightly tense, as if he too sensed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. "Maybe I'm just overthinking it," I told myself, but I couldn't deny that the feeling had lodged itself in my mind, stubborn and persistent. That evening, dinner unfolded in an unusually quiet manner. Greg, as usual, seemed oblivious to anything out of the ordinary. He talked about work, his lectures at school, and his plans for the weekend outing. Ryan sat across from me, quieter than usual, his eyes fixed on his plate, avoiding direct contact with mine. I too said little, nodding or giving short replies, trying to keep everything as natural as possible. But inside, I knew that Ryan's unusual gaze had planted a peculiar feeling within me. It wasn't fear, nor was it outright worry, but rather a sense of uncertainty, something I couldn't yet name, but knew I couldn't ignore. That night, as the soft yellow glow of the living room lamp spread across the familiar space, I sat silently in my usual armchair. The ticking of the wall clock marked the passage of time, but my thoughts were trapped in a chaotic loop. The pale moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the floor, gentle and subdued, mirroring the vague unease enveloping me. I tried to convince myself that everything was normal. Perhaps Ryan's gaze was merely a reflection of pure admiration, a natural reaction from a young man towards the stepmother he deeply respected. But why did I feel a nameless tension every time his eyes rested on me? It was as if that gaze had weight, reaching into a hidden corner of my soul I had never thought would be awakened. I took a deep breath, my eyes fixed on the teacup on the table. The warmth of the tea had long faded, leaving only a silent, dark brown pool, much like my emotions at that moment. "Maybe I'm overthinking it," I whispered to myself, but the words felt weak, incapable of dispelling the unease filling my mind. Ryan and I, though separated by just a wall, seemed to exist in a vast emotional chasm. Two restless souls, each drowning in unspoken thoughts, like waves simmering beneath the surface of the ocean, waiting for a strong gust of wind to erupt into a storm.